A shallow forest stream coursing through the night. Amid the sound of water, a beast prepares to fight. Those who go in unprepared will bow before its might. Bathing in the falls, it waits, using water as its shield. Yellow collar standing proud, its fangs shall never yield.
Now you may be asking yourself, Connor, you made a highlight video regarding the mascots of the entire Monster Hunter franchise, the king of the skies himself, Rathalos. And then you made a video highlighting your favorite monster of all time, the ferocious Emperor of Flame Teostra. Why is your third choice Royal Ludroth? We're going with the sponge lion. It's a bit of a step down, isn't it? And that's a fair question. So, couple of reasons. First off, the flagship monsters and the Elder Dragons are really easy to do for videos like this. They're very famous, they have a lot of fans, they are very standout highlight monsters. They're the big events advertised for you to come hunt, the big grand challenges with weapons in every category and multiple versions of their musical themes, big spectacle attacks and tons of cutscenes, lots of build-up. I don't want to burn through all of them super fast. I want to keep some balance in the release of these monster highlight videos, a mix between the grand and the humble. Second reason. Not every monster that is important to me is a flagship or a super powerful boss monster. There's a few hundred of these creatures now, and there's a lot of these low and middle tier difficulty encounters that have had just as lasting impacts on me as well. And since I try to inject my own story and my own connection and feelings towards the world of Monster Hunter into these videos to help them be distinctly mine, it helps to talk about the monsters that really stick out to me, big and small. Third, as cool and badass as a lot of the Elder Dragons are, most of their lore revolves around what they do, not how they do it. Elder Dragon biology can often boil down to, this dragon generates electrified ice beams from its elbows. Experts believe that they might be able to control these beams using the goofy looking arrangement of horns on their head, but yeah, your guess is as good as theirs. Due to the fact that the powers and abilities of the lower level monsters are less divorced from reality than those of the more powerful monsters, it is far easier for the people who make these games to devise possible evolutionary methods and biological reasonings for why these creatures can do what they do. For this reason, the lore of some of these weaker monsters is often more fascinating than that of the big spooky doom dragons. So Royal Ludroth and I, what does our history look like? How has he left an impact on me? Let me rewind you back a little bit to the Teostra video. In that video, if you remember, I poked fun at the younger me, sharing that in my original playthrough of Monster Hunter Freedom Unite, I played a weapon I really didn't know, using armor that I only looked at the defensive stats of, and kinda sorta really still didn't know what skills were. Now, if you're even more familiar with your CR-Volcanic lore, you will remember that Freedom Unite was not my first Monster Hunter game. Try was. And if I was that bad playing my second game of Monster Hunter, can you imagine what a window-licking, square shape in round hole putting doofus I was playing my first? Let me put it this way. Forget the skill system. I barely knew how to upgrade weapons and armor for an embarrassingly long period of time. This is where our sponge-maned friend comes in. I defeated the Great Jaggy, struggled past the Quirupeko, but I was walled off by Royal Ludroth. I did not have the damage to get through him. I don't know if Try had somewhat bloated monster health in comparison to unupgraded weapon damage output, because I really haven't bumped into something quite like this afterwards, or perhaps I was really just that bad at the game. Couldn't remember, but whatever reason being, I could not beat him. If I didn't triple cart, I timed out every single time for like a week. I probably failed that quest a half dozen times maybe. Fun fact, I was really hoping to get an emulator of Try Ultimate up and running to try and recreate this scenario the best I could, but my laptop couldn't run the thing very well. Unfortunate. So I was stuck. I didn't try and make new gear. I didn't look up guides online. I just didn't think to do those things. I just kept beating my head on this wall for a couple of days, but the wall didn't want to budge. I needed help. I needed to learn from people who knew what they were doing. And so it was the immovable, fluffy yellow wall that was Royal Ludroth that forced me to delve into the glory that was Monster Hunter Try's online play. I'm not going to dive too deep into this, but anyone who played Try knows that Loch Lac was damn cool. The gateway that led to all the different rooms, the massive desert city in the background, the huge hub with all these different facilities. Wasn't perfect, but that place is home to me. Please bring Loch Lac back, Capcom. Or at least a city gathering hub. It was too good, man. My memory is a little fuzzy on whether or not Monster Hunter Try was my first major online gaming experience. It was either that or the first-person shooter called Conduit. Raise your hand if you have any idea what Conduit is. I played them both around the same time, and these two were massive factors when it came to me as a video game fan. They got me into competitive and cooperative gaming. I bought Monster Hunter Try for a bunch of my friends so we could play together because I loved the game that much. I still play modern Monster Hunter with those guys nearly 15 years later. That's what Royal Ludroth did for me by kicking my dumb ass until I got the message. And he will never not be amongst my all-time favorites for that. And it can't be understated that the Royal Ludroth had a major impact on Monster Hunter simply as a whole. Although he's not the first underwater monster you meet, and not the poster boy of the Leviathan monster category, he is the first underwater boss and first Leviathan in the entire franchise that you ever fight properly. He is the tutorial for proper underwater combat, the introduction to one of the best monster categories in the entire franchise, and if you want to look at it a certain way, the beginning of the entire third-dimensional shift to Monster Hunter gameplay. Underwater has been absent for a long time now, but in its place we have received a lot of vertical combat, a lot of three-dimensional movement, to the point where in Monster Hunter Rise, we are back to having sustained three-dimensional movement via wire bugs. And speaking of Rise, due to the virtue of him having a pretty decent ground-based moveset and lacking some of the technical problems that Lagiacrus and Ignactor have been suffering, he's the only of the original Tri-Leviathans who has made his way into the 5th generation, and heralded in a good chunk of new ones too. Royal Ludroth was kind of a first glance to where this franchise was going to be headed. Alrighty, so let's take a look at how this guy functions. Why does this crocodile, lizard, lion looking thing have a giant sponge coming out of the back of his head anyway? Well, to go over that, we need to downsize a little bit. Anyone who's ever fought a Royal Ludroth no doubt is aware of its pack of smaller lookalikes, simply named Ludroth. The Ludroth is a species of reptilian, yellow-green scaled, quadrupedal aquatic omnivores, predominantly predators, but they can eat vegetation. Their forelimbs have developed separate toes and sharp claws, whilst their hind limbs are essentially just flippers which improve their ability to swim and hunt for fish. They lack gills, but are capable of staying submerged for extended periods of time, and never stray too far from plentiful bodies of water. The Royal Ludroth is an alpha male ruling over a pack of mostly female Ludroth, with the possible inclusion of a few juvenile males. See, Ludroth as a species produces far more females than they do males. However, the females will never reach the size and strength of a full-grown male, and it is these alpha male Royal Ludroth who singularly tend to the needs of the entirety of its pack of females, which can include anywhere from 10 to 20 members. Meaning that the species likely evolved to produce less males, as they simply didn't need a 1-to-1 ratio for their species to thrive. A singular Royal Ludroth is all a pack needs to successfully hunt, produce young, tend to the eggs, and protect nesting females. A Royal's mane is fundamental to fulfilling all of these tasks. See, Ludroth need to stay moist in order to survive. Their body produces a mucus that allows them to move and to function properly. If a Ludroth starts to dry out, it runs the risk of dying. I compared the Ludroth to crocodiles a little bit ago. I'll talk a little bit more about that in his combat section, but this aspect of their biology kind of makes them more akin to gigantic newts or salamanders, mucus-producing creatures that require moisture to function and survive. This is why you will never find them straying too far from sources of water, the females especially. To help them remain moist and function outside of the water, Ludroth develop a sponge-like material around their necks and upper torso. That's what the yellow patches on their backs are. Anytime you've ever carved an immature sponge off a Ludroth, that's what that is. Females and juvenile males can only grow very small manes, only allowing them brief time out of the water. They're also not particularly graceful or fast on land, so they will only venture far from a body of water if they hear potential prey struggling, or if they are summoned by a royal to assist in battle. Or if Capcom just doesn't put underwater combat in Monster Hunter again. I want it back, man. As one could guess, having a gigantic mane of this water-retaining sponge-like material allows a Royal Ludroth to bypass many of the shortcomings of his kin. He can last much longer on land without drying out, allowing him to travel much farther inland so that he can hunt for food for his pack. This is kind of a cool inverse of lions, actually. In that instance, the males are fewer in number and do hunt but leave most of it to the females. Ludroth packs also have way less males, but it is the lone male that is the most successful hunter, whereas the more plentiful females are capable enough predators but not the primary food earners. That's kind of a cool contrast. The Royal Ludroth's mane serves a few more key purposes. The first is strength display. As with many animals who have an aspect of their physiology they show off to attract a mate, a bigger mane means a stronger Royal Ludroth. A stronger Royal Ludroth is a more successful Royal Ludroth. A royal will attempt to ward off rival males by displaying their mane and horn crest on their head. If this is ineffectual, the two royals will eventually come to blows, and the victor will control the pack. The usurping of a pack of Ludroth is not an uncommon occurrence. Mating rights are fiercely contested, and a male that has instilled himself as an alpha may be driven away after only a couple of months. Additionally, the massive amount of water that a Royal Ludroth can retain is pivotal to the process of cultivating new Ludroth. The females make their nest on the shore, and obviously need to guard these nests, thus spending much less time hydrating themselves. A Royal Ludroth will go to the nesting females and shake water from its mane to keep them hydrated while they guard the eggs. Come to think of it, one singular Royal Ludroth does an absolute ton of work to maintain its pack. Kinda makes me like him more, reading up on all the functions and responsibilities this guy has. Makes his mane a lot cooler too. At face value, it's kinda like, oh, lions, but marine reptiles. Neat. But the team thought up a dozen functions for this thing to have to keep this species going. And I'm not even done with what this big massive sponge can do yet. Damn man, Monster Hunter is a really underrated fictional setting. Finally, the spongy mane of these animals serves as both an offensive tool and as armor when in combat. I will elaborate more on how Royal Ludroth fights in his combat section of this video, but in brief summation, the mane protects a lot of major internal organs for a Ludroth, and can be a tough material to get through. Having his mane damaged will likely have long-term detriments for a Royal Ludroth, but better the mane than his actual body. In terms of offense, the massive amounts of water stored in the mane can be brought into the Ludroth's internal organ, called an aqua sac, to mix with the mucus substance his body generates to form a watery projectile that the Royal Ludroth can spit from his mouth. It is far from the epitome of elemental prowess, and it cuts into the Ludroth's valuable moisture supply, but it is an effective option to batter an opponent with at a range. I got a few more interesting tidbits of ecology about the Ludroth. They are apathetic parents, leaving their young to fend for their own as soon as they're born. The claws of a Royal Ludroth are far more of a movement tool than a combat tool. When a Royal Ludroth is exhausted in combat, it doesn't go looking for food to eat, as most monsters do. It rehydrates itself by bathing in waterfalls or in open water to revitalize his energy. This is one of the more unique methods a monster has to overcome fatigue. Very cool. Ludroth are pretty successful marine predators due to their numbers and swimming prowess, but they're not the best terrestrial hunters. On land, they usually eat pretty opportunistically, only when the chance arrives. They'll steal kills or interrupt a losing battle to score an easier meal. Additionally, there's a wealth of uses for their body parts when they're hunted. Their meat is said to taste very good, their sponges have different uses, especially in clothing, and a lot of their body parts can be utilized for boat craftsmanship, their tails especially. Now, in the greater scheme of Monster Hunter, Ludroth are effective hunters, great swimmers, possess some very useful adaptations, and are effective in a team, but they still exist on lower rungs of the food chain. An entire pack of Ludroth would likely be fried in an attempt to ward off an intrusive Lagiacrus. And I'd be comfortable in saying that on land, a Royal Ludroth would struggle with something as common and mid-level as a Rathian. Ludroth do not exist at the height of the ecological pecking order in any situation, but they are impressive, they are dangerous, and they are quite good at what they do, sitting comfortably as monsters to be wary of along coastlines and within the rivers and lakes of dense humid forests. Remember what I said about lower tier monsters having a ton of interesting and complex ecology? As I've said before, the hyperbolized realism of Monster Hunter is not what I value the most about the monsters of Monster Hunter, but I think this attention to detail, this thoughtfulness, this creativity granted via the flexible limits of real-world science, the connectivity and relation and inspiration between these fictitious animals and the animals of our real world, this wholly unnecessary level of craftsmanship that goes into these animals. And I do mean animals, not just video game enemies, not just bosses, but full-on living creatures in this video game world. This is why the monsters of Monster Hunter stand the test of time. It's why those of us who play these games remember all 200 something of their names without even really thinking about it. Another game might have called this guy Hydro Lion or Absorber Beast. No, he's Royal Ludroth. And although he's not a massive fan favorite, he's enormously memorable. And that memorability comes simply from the luck of being designed by the Monster Hunter team. That whole spiel I gave about his biology, that was kind of cool, right? Pretty informative. For a minute, you kind of forget that in terms of the Monster Hunter hierarchy, this guy is probably the top of low-tier difficulty. In game terms, kind of just a speed bump. Quite impactful in Try as the first ever underwater fight in the whole franchise, but in future releases, he's not a big deal. He and his Ludroth are good low-tier threats for oceanic and rainforest maps. They're effective map ecology flusher outers. He's a good fight if you're just hunting for fun or need something from him in the endgame loop, but he is never the highlight monster on the map. And yet all that thought went into designing him. He has all that biological info. I don't call him low tier and unimpactful in the grand scheme of things to denigrate him. I say it to make the point that there's so much craftsmanship and effort and care and attention to detail in everything that this team makes. Furthermore, extremely fleshed out monsters like Royal Ludroth serve to ground and or contrast from some of the wilder, more fantastical, more unexplained monsters in the series roster. Monsters so well thought out as Royal Ludroth serve to either affirm that some of these wackier, crazier, more inexplicable, more mysterious monsters with more out there powers do indeed have a biological explanation for how they live and function. We just don't know the answers to that very well yet. Or the groundedness of Royal Ludroth serves to add a layer of mystique and fear and awe to these monsters who defy the laws of nature. Pick your poison as to which way you look at this. Personally, I think it's a bit of column A and a bit of column B. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the fighting prowess of the Royal Ludroth in his lore chunk. Now let's talk about his actual moveset in-game. Despite being in 3 major Monster Hunter titles, not including expansions, Royal Ludroth hasn't really changed too much. He's been handed a few new moves over the years, as we'll discuss, and has had some speed changes coinciding with the relative speed of the game that he's in, but there isn't too much of an evolution here. And I'm sure he could stand to benefit from a few new tweaks here and there as he finds his way into future installments, but quite honestly, I don't think he needs too much more than he has. Do bear in mind that he is a low-tier monster and should not be expected to be ripping the world asunder with every attack he does. He's got a few of your standard Leviathan physical attacks: a sliding charge forwards, a double tail hit, claw swipes, an attack where he curls up his body and lashes out with his head and tail in 2 different directions, chain bite attacks, and forward leaps. Stuff that you see Lagiacrus and Ignactor use a lot. Dependable attacks to be repurposed on similar skeletons. Now, the reason why I was always associating Royal Ludroth with crocodiles in my head is because of his roll attacks. I just kinda paired him up with the crocodile or alligator death roll that they do, even though he rolls into you rather than grabbing you and rolling you underwater. Actually, come to think of it, that'd be kind of sick. He should do that. He can do this full body roll attack just by itself or out of a hip check. They're pretty well telegraphed, but if you have bad positioning, it's tough to get out of the range of his full body coming at you like that. Probably one of the most effective and most defining tools in his arsenal. In terms of his water attacks, as I stated earlier, he can't do anything ridiculously crazy with it, but he has a couple of tricks. His standard usage of water is firing off a number of these projectiles at various angles in front of him. Occasionally, there will be lingering, bubbling effects of this water on the ground that can deal damage and inflict water blight if you run into them. Not too sure what causes them to stick around. Maybe the mucus hasn't quite dissipated yet. I don't know. He will often combine his water projectile attack with a charge forwards, spewing globs of water to and fro as he rushes around the arena. When agitated, he'll use the agility granted to him by his slippery body to turn rapidly on a dime and chain his charges together. This attack reminds me a lot of the very similar projectile bolstered charge attacks we've seen from the likes of Yankutku and Gypsaros. Not a connection I was expecting to draw, but kinda neat to see a traditionally bird wyvern attack adapted for a Leviathan. His only other interaction he has with the water element is that when he's in an area with wet ground and does his body slam attack, it'll kick up a big splash of water and that can inflict the blight in a splash zone around him. Nothing earth-shattering here, but some cool stuff that serves to continue to make him distinct. His moveset underwater is also pretty simple, but to be fair, Try and Try Ultimate were the first and so far only underwater Monster Hunter games out there, so it would make sense that his toolkit isn't the most developed, considering he was effectively a tutorial for the space. He gets his claw swipe, his dash, his water projectile shot, and his chain bite attacks underwater. His biggest new tool here is an upwards flick of his tail that hits in front of him, really great for catching hunters that are attacking his head and his mane. For the majority of the games he's in, Royal Ludroth really doesn't change all that much. Portable Third slowed him down and slowed a couple of other monsters down just in general. Try Ultimate brought that speed back up, and then Generations and Generations Ultimate did pretty much nothing new with him at all. He's just the ground-based Royal Ludroth that you fought in Try Ultimate and Try. Monster Hunter Rise, specifically the Sunbreak expansion, offers up easily Royal Ludroth's best fight. Rise is the fastest Monster Hunter game to date, and in Sunbreak, a lot of the roster got speed, aggression, and combo extensions to keep up with the immense speed and maneuverability of the hunters. Royal Ludroth was no exception. He poses a half-decent threat simply from just how fast he can go. His water-spewing charges are probably the most dangerous thing he has up his sleeve. If you're not careful, it's easy to get hit in fairly rapid succession by him. Rise also adds probably his coolest attack that he's got. He swings his head in an arc around him, trying to trip you up and knock you into the air. If he is successful and you don't have a wire bog to dodge in midair, he will chain the head sweep up into a full body roll ending in the tail sweep. I really love how fluid the animation in this is. So yeah, nothing too flashy and not a lot that no other monster can do, but it's a fun moveset to deal with that has some potential to catch you off guard. There have been instances of me fighting afflicted Royal Ludroth in Sunbreak and getting to pretty low health due to getting hit in a rapid succession. He does what he does really well, and I think his series of various full body roll attacks are what really give his moveset its identity. I'm glad that Sunbreak leaned into that aspect of him with this new combo they gave him. And the improved animation quality of Sunbreak just allows him to move in a way that looks better than he ever has. Royal Ludroth has always had a damn good design. Sleek, simple, distinct, colorful, communicates its core concept across pretty well. He's a reptilian aquatic lion with a spongy mane as opposed to a furry one. I think he's one of the cooler low-tier monsters out there. Lower-level monsters usually sport some of the more eccentric and quirky designs and personalities, but Royal Ludroth carries himself as a bit more of a badass than some of his contemporaries. I don't always love the darker colors of the 5th generation, but I do think Royal Ludroth benefited from this minor design overhaul. His colors blend into one another a bit more naturally, and he just looks a bit more threatening. Though the pose they chose for his official render definitely helps. Another thing Royal Ludroth hugely benefited from was the graphical fidelity update of the 5th generation. Yeah, a lot of the monsters look great, but one comment my buddies and I were making when Rise came out was, holy, look how good Royal Ludroth's mane looks. You could definitely see what they were going for with Tri. I could always tell it was supposed to be a sponge, but the texture was always so fleshy. It just kind of looked like it had melting yellow clumps of meat coming off of them, a little bit. Royal Ludroth in Rise almost looks like a plush toy. Dude's growing a mutated yellow couch out of his neck. It's some of the coolest texture work I've seen in modern Monster Hunter. Yeah, scales and armor plating looks great and all, but you see that on everything. Ludroth's sponge mane was only made cooler, more prominent, more distinct in this game. They made another outstanding visual change with Royal Ludroth in Rise as well. They always had this really cool effect when a Royal Ludroth was exhausted, its mane would deflate and sag because he was running out of water, and he had to go rehydrate. They kept that in Rise, but now they wash a ton of his color saturation out when he gets exhausted. You can physically see his body drying out. It's a pretty fantastic effect that just keeps adding more life to this guy. Someone on the development team must really like Royal Ludroth because they treat him very well. There's a lot of other stuff to like here. The fact that his upper body is built for land maneuverability and combat, and his lower body is designed for aquatic traversal. The odd looking way the green scales on his tail give away to this kind of bone-colored armor plating at the tail's end. I was never really too sure why they went with that design choice. I loved the orange glow his eyes would get when he was underwater in Tri. I really like the crown of horns he's got that further adds to this lordly visage. I love that his head structure is kind of feline, kind of reptilian, keeping him in line with both of his inspirations, not looking too much like one or the other. Heck, I even like the brown spots that just add a little bit of extra color to the mane, and the spikes he's got coming out of his elbow. He's just really good, dude. What a masterfully executed concept. Let's take a lion, cross it with a marine reptile, turn his mane into a sponge to add to the aquatic theme, and then find all these cool ways that we can play off the sponge mane, and how that affects his biology and the females who follow him. Love this guy's design. I am definitely a bigger fan of Royal Ludroth's weapons than I am his armor. But his armor is by no means bad. I'll elaborate in a little bit. In pretty much every set he has, they go full force with a sponge in his armor crafting. For his high rank armor, the male and female are pretty much identical up until the headpiece. Same massive spongy overcoat, same sponge boots, same sponge sleeves. And when you get to the headpiece, the male has this forward pointing mane of sponge spikes, and the female gets this funky looking hairstyle made from the spongy material. Pretty cool. I do like the coat. I think that's always been a memorable look. The main material is said to be fairly durable, so I guess that makes sense practically as armor. It's not bad looking at all. I'll give a quick nod to some of these other sets he has. The high rank gunner gear slims things down, loses the coat. I like the goggles they add, especially on the male headpiece. And as we'll see, each Ludroth armor set gives a new hairstyle made out of the sponge material, which is a neat gimmick that they stuck with. Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate added the XR and R armor, which are made out of Hyper Royal Ludroth parts. If you don't know, Hyper monsters were simply the amplified endgame version of monsters for Generations Ultimate. They're equivalent to frenzied, tempered, or afflicted monsters. A lot of variations on what we know here. Spongy clothes, spongy hairstyle. Side note, though I never got too deep into Generations Ultimate's endgame, I really liked that it had more than the standard one set of high rank, one set of G rank armor sets, Blade Master and Gunner, and that was it. Letting the developers explore some new ideas. I hope we get this back. In hindsight, every monster having only 2 armor sets per gender in Rise is a bit of a bummer. Generations Ultimate is over here with 6 per gender in a couple of cases. Especially now that we can make layered armor, bringing back the XR and R sets or something in that similar vein, I think would be pretty phenomenal. And come on, we all know that fashion hunting is the actual endgame. Give us a couple more options. The G-rank gunner armor isn't my favorite for either option. Neither of them are wearing pants, and they're the least spongy of pretty much any of the sets. Now, what we're all the most familiar with are these 2 sets. The G-rank Blade Master armor, or simply the default Master rank armor in Rise and Sunbreak. The female keeps the hairpiece, but gets a hat on top of it, and I really like this dress she has. The male armor actually goes for like a sponge samurai look. It's probably my favorite design out of all these sets. The headpiece looks really, really good. Instead of making it look like clothing, they molded the sponge into a more armor-like shape. These are some really solid designs here. Royal Ludroth has some pretty neat sets all around, pretty distinct, a bit iconic in their own right, though they are, for the most part, a little one note. They're all sponge clothes of various styles and shapes and aesthetics with a neat looking hairstyle up top, with the exception of the Master rank armor. The reason I think Royal Ludroth armor could be a bit better is because his weapons exist. See, his armor may utilize his most famous asset, but his weapons maximize their creativity by using all his assets. Now, I said in my Rathalos video that I appreciated the fact that his gear relied on trying to make armor and weapons that looked like conventional armor and weapons with Rathalos augmentation. I really appreciate when the gear we make really looks like it was made from the body parts of the monsters we slew. I love the Teostra armor to death, but Teostra ain't made out of metal. Breaks the immersion just a little bit. I also said that the bits on sticks weapons can get boring if done really terribly like World did, but Royal Ludroth weapons are pretty peak Monster Hunter weapon design. His mane, his scales, his bones, his spikes, his claws, his fins, they all make their way into Royal Ludroth's weapons. This is what it means to not be wasteful with a successful kill. His bones usually serve as the weapon's base, with sharpened bones or claws making up the blades. His scales add color, and chunks of his mane are often used as a decorative accessory to bring the whole design together. Looking at a few favorites, his greatsword was a weapon I made way back in Tri. Always loved how this thing looks. The blue ropes tying the sponge to the hilt and bottom of the blade, the sharpened bone for the blade, the rows of claws going down the back half of the sword. This one has just a great shape and a lot of color. I like that the dual blades and sword and shield have the same core sword with a different weapon in the offhand. The dual blades has a second sword lacking the sponge attachment, and the shield has a really nice fan of claws around it. I love how how the bow ends with tips of his claws that both meet at the bone in the middle. And the big circular sponge right in the middle of the weapon is just kind of a cool decorative flair. His hammer has always looked fantastic. Maybe his best looking weapon. This hood of spongy material tied back and encircling this massive bone cudgel. His hunting horn is easily his goofiest weapon, being a twin set of speakers on a stick. And it's got this cool crown of spikes on the end here. I love the spiral lance. The shield modeled after his head crest, the aforementioned spiral sponge going all the way up the bone lance, the hand guard made out of bits of his sponge and some of his claws. But as much as I love this lance, I gotta give the honor of best Royal Ludroth weapon to the gun lance. Look at this bad boy. It's this triple barrel harpoon gun with this crossbow firing mechanism sticking out of the side here. It's a really kick-ass design with a ton of color, great use of the greens and yellow with that blue rope part returning as an accent. Thing looks sick. I've said it like 3 times, I'll say it again. Someone on this development team really likes Royal Ludroth. These weapons are pretty top-notch. Maybe not the coolest ever, but they have so much personality to them. Love this stuff. Really glad layered weapons exist so I can run these designs on occasion. The last thing we need to cover is Royal Ludroth variations, of which he has one. The purple Royal Ludroth. Purple Royal Ludroth is not bad, visually at least. And the fight doesn't look horrible either. Though he is a poison monster, so I'm assuming he's probably not anybody's favorite. Unfortunately, I have not yet been able to play Tri-Ultimate. I got my 3DS right before 4 Ultimate came out, my 3DS is currently broken, and my laptop ain't beefy enough to run it on an emulator. When I eventually upgrade, I'll be able to give it a proper shot, but that's something to look forward to in the future. Though I can watch gameplay online and just look up what he does. So that's what I did. Visually, I think he looks pretty good. I do prefer the original, but I like this color scheme for what it is. Being a 3rd generation subspecies who hasn't come back since then, he's not a crazy departure from the base Royal Ludroth. Lore-wise, he rarely swims, and he's never seen with a pack, which makes sense as he would be an active detriment to them. The purple Royal Ludroth's body produces a potent toxin, which has turned his mane purple and mixes with the water he stores to add a poisonous edge to his watery attacks. He doesn't do too much new in terms of actually dispersing his elemental power. They just now inflict poison instead of water blight. Honestly, I think it would make sense and be kind of cool if they did both. I don't think we have a poison water monster. I'd take that. He keeps his water projectiles, spewing charge, and splashing body slam, but they all have their element swapped. Also, he kicks up a poison cloud when he swipes his claws. Honestly, I think the coolest thing this guy can do is a running leap into a barrel roll. That animation's pretty cool. Though I don't think the purple mane looks as good as the yellow, I do like how it looks with the rest of his body. He swaps a darker forest camo green for a very pale, almost kind of gray green. Also, his horns and claws have lost their blue tint and have gained a brighter scarlet red coloration instead. I like this look, and as a complete package, I think he's cool enough. Again, I know a lot of people don't particularly love status effect monsters. I'm going to be honest, I really don't mind them. Poison especially. I'd be happy to see him if he made his way into a new game. such a damn cool monster. Great design, immaculate weapons, one of the best low-level fights, a mountain of really well thought out lore and biology that plays with the concepts of his inspiration incredibly well. Royal Ludroth has always been a favorite of mine, but delving in a little deeper and writing the script for this video, I've come to love this guy a whole lot more. This is why the lower level monsters matter. Yeah, the big boys are awesome, but there's so much meat and personality and care and love put into the formation of these guys whom we bypass so early on in our monster hunting adventures. A big part of the mission of this video was to spread some love to the underrated lower level monsters out there. But now I'm actually really excited to delve into these low tiers and dig up what makes them tick. I'd say I'm just as excited to make some lower level monster videos as I am to go into some of the big name flagships and over the top elder dragons. I was always gonna give them the respect they deserved, but they're so much more than in-betweeners for the flagships and the super predators and the elders, both in terms of my content and in the games themselves. To me, Royal Ludroth is always gonna be the monster who kicked my ass out of the flooded forest and all the way to the desert city. Yeah, I likely would have tried the multiplayer eventually. I would have recommended the game to my friends eventually. But he's the guy who did it. He made me learn. He made me seek assistance. He made me engage with the complex systems of an RPG, which is something I never really did all that much of before then. I'll forever be thankful for that. I hope they keep Royal Ludroth around, in or out of the water. Fingers crossed he's going back in sometime soon, but that's another video. He and the Ludroth who follow him really complete any seaside or watery jungle map they reside on, flushing out their ecosystems and adding to their vibrant array of life. He's a small but significant part of what makes Monster Hunter great. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the latest and greatest in my Monster Hunter Highlights videos. It has been a phenomenal, and the growth on the channel has been nothing short of heartwarming. This is my first proper video made after passing the 1,000 subscriber threshold. My goal for the year cleared in 4 months. I couldn't ask for a better group of viewers, and I'm excited to see your ranks grow. It's been a joy to see so many recurring names in my comment section. It tells me there's an actual community forming, and that means the fucking world. Trust me, man, I notice when some of you keep popping up, and no matter how many subs I get, I'ma remember the ones who stick around. Both the complete strangers out there and the guys I've known for years who've been immensely supportive of this venture. So we hit 1K in 4 months. I think we can do 5K before the year's out. What do you think, boys? I think we're unstoppable. If you have enjoyed yourself, a like would be super appreciated. Subscribe and hit the bell to keep up to date. Tell me down below which monsters do you think are the unsung heroes of the lower rungs of Monster Hunter's power hierarchy. What was your first, or if you've had more than one, what were some of your walls in Monster Hunter? This has been CR-Volcanic or Connor, and next time you log on to whatever Monster Hunter game you're playing, show some respect for the phenomenal animals in those low star quests. See you soon, guys.